Good evening, everyone. I've got an interesting purchase that came in the mail today, and I want to show it to you and show you how I'm going to use it. I don't have the microphone hooked up right now, the lav mic I usually use. I'm just using the phone's mic. I'm testing a new setup, and if I can use it without the lav mic, it would really be a lot more convenient. Anyway, what we've got here is we've got two 18650 holders that mount to the back of this board here. Let's see, they mount right there. It even says 18650. All right, so let's zoom down on this board, have a look at it, and I'll tell you what I think it does, and we'll see how it actually works in practice. So if you'll notice, it says UPS, and the possibilities are DC 5 volts, DC 9 volts, DC 12 volts. I ordered 9 volts, so presumably the UPS side, plus and minus here, is going to have 9 volts on it. On the other side here, it has what look like a 5 volt rails, which can be fed by a through a micro USB. This looks like a charge control section here to charge the two 18650s on the other side. We've got some chunky diodes, and we've got an IC here and a large inductor. So what I'm hoping this does, given the sketchy listing for it, is what I'm hoping is that there's a 9 volt side and there's a 5 volt side, and if you disconnect the outside power to the 9 volt side, this will step in and provide 9 volts via from the 18650s. The 5 volt side presumably would be used for charging them, otherwise it makes sense that they'd use 5 volts here because most of these charge controllers are designed for 5 volts. So that makes reasonable sense to me. What I'd like to do is put this in my Sanyo 1980s Boombox mounted in the battery compartment. So I'm pleased that these were not soldered in and that I can possibly relocate them as needed to keep them in the battery compartment there. So what I'm going to do with this, and what you'll next probably see, although I will record it later, what you'll next see in this video will be me just trying this out, seeing what happens when you put different loads on it and whatnot. I'll put a 9 volt supply on one side and see if it charges the batteries, and what happens when you remove the 9 volt supply from that side. Now, apart from that, the question will be how to fit it in the battery compartment of the Boombox, which I'm not entirely sure how that's going to work, but we'll figure it out. So I thought I'd have a quick look and see how this might fit together. These are two 18650s in, the batteries fit just fine, but there's not really any way to get this board in while the batteries are in there. So I think if the board goes in, it could be mounted behind, like it could be mounted here or here. I'd probably put it over behind here or something like that. Now that would mean that you wouldn't have access to the USB in unless I wanted to take the trouble to make that work, but I think that's fine with me. And you can always, if you want to, charge these in an external charger. So yeah, so that gives us some idea of what's going on. So what that means is that when I put these together, I'm going to get some cable and wire the batteries to one side and then to the other, on the assumption that they could sneak through one of these little holes that are already in here. So I will say the other thing I'm thinking as I look at this board is that, assuming this produces a good 5 volt out, if I wanted to put something like a Bluetooth receiver, build it into the radio, I would already have a 5-volt out to work with. So before I get started with doing much on this, I'm just going to get the multimeter out for a moment. And what I want to do is I want to find out what's common together here. I think the positives appear to be common, but let's find out before making any assumptions. All right, so are these common? Yes. How about the negatives? Yes. So that shows that it isn't charging the batteries individually. Yeah, so that's negative, and that's positive. So that means that we could play around with just one battery for the purposes of messing around with this. Now, I'm just curious, if we look at the negatives on here, that's 5-volt negatives. So that's so the power supply negative is in fact separate from the battery negative. That's battery negative. That's battery positive. And obviously one would hope that the 5 volts would be separate. So what I think I'm going to do, just to play with this now, is to put a single battery holder on. And I'm tempted actually just to tack them on the back, even though I just think they're going to be hard to remove if I put them on like that I'll never get them unsoldered. And I don't want to bend these pins in case I decide that I want to do something different with it. So let's just get a little bit of wire here. We'll get some black and some red. Oh, about the same length. So what I'll do is I'll just strip these. I'm waiting for the soldering iron to warm up over there. So I got those stripped. I'll just do these. I'm using the kind of stripper everybody tells you never to use, because it's what was on top when I opened the drawer. I agree that it is inefficient for anything that involves more than like one operation, but it's here, so that's what I'm using. All right, so we've got this. Let's solder onto here. So plus is this side. And I'll just get this out of the way. Tin my wire here very quickly. Okay. And we'll just oops. Oh, that's okay, not as bad as last, still a bit dry, but again, this is just a temporary measure. We'll do the same thing with this black wire for the negative. Okay. And that's better than the other one. Okay, so we've got those on there. That'll do. Right, so let's twist these together like this. Just to keep the whole thing under some control. Okay, and so let's have a look at this. So we know that battery negative is that side and battery positive is that side. So let's just stick these through like that and give them a quick solder. You know what? I'm not going to do it like that. I'm going to solder it onto here like this. I see they've got all those vias going through. Okay, we'll do it like this. Again, the goal is not to create a permanent connection here. Just something that lets us play with this a little bit to see what it does. That will do negative. And then positive like that. I've got the camera down lower. This is one thing I can do with the new tripod-y setup thing. All right. The unfortunate thing about, I'll cut that shorter, about these is that they'll be easy to remove in the future. Okay, so just to have a look, positive to positive, positive, negative to negative. All right, so we have the battery on. So what we need to do next is solder on some 9-volt supply, and then I'm going to have to go and see what I've got that will work for that purpose. So what I've got for a power supply is this 9-volt USB power supply. It steps up to this plug here. Now I'll just have to find myself an adapter for that to get it into the board, and we'll see how that goes. These things just have a boost converter in them. Here's an adapter that should serve my needs. So what we'll do is just solder this on here, UPS plus, UPS minus, and see how that goes. So, yeah. Again, our assumption, or my assumption, is that this will get redone once I figure out how the whole thing works. But for the moment, this is, I'll just mock it up. Okay, so here we go. We have UPS minus, UPS negative into this plug. This plug, we have our battery here, and we have that hooked up to this. So what I'll do is I'm going to lift up the camera, which I just banged, and we'll get some power on that, put a battery in there, and see what we see. All right, so there's no power hooked up to it. I don't know what this is reading, probably some voltage built up in the capacitors. It is going down, which is indicative of that. I'm going to take one of these, probably not fully charged because I haven't charged them in a while, and we'll make sure we get the polarity correct. Positive, positive, and that's where our red wire is. Let's see what happens to that when I put in. We got a light on, over there, diode 6, it's red, and we have smack on 9 volts. So that's pretty good. Okay. So I'm going to unplug the battery, and I'm going to put my 9-volt power supply here onto it. Let me go find a USB power bank, and we'll do that. And we have this old power bank, which still works just fine. We can watch the... So let's plug this in here. 9.1 volts. Right? So that appears to be working. Let's unplug that. We should see it go down as the, presumably one of these resistors is across these capacitors. Maybe not. Let's put this one in. Okay. Now let's plug this in and see what happens. So the voltage goes up a little bit, which means that this is providing the power. If we unplug it, that seems to work. Now what I want to do is have a look at these 5-volt, the 5-volt side of this. Is the 5-volt side getting powered when this is going? So 5-volt plus is here, 5-volt minus is here. No. Okay, so what does this say? This says something rather interesting. This will not charge these batteries from the 9-volt line. It will only charge them from the 5-volt line. So let's put 5 volts on that and see what happens. What we have here are alligator clips that connect into a USB power bank. They don't actually work that well with this one, but I'm assuming they'll be enough of a load. I'll use this to turn on. All right. So we're seeing 5 volts on there. If I unplug it, no 5 volts. Plug it back in, 5 volts. And we're seeing a diode there indicating that the battery is charging. So I think the way this works is it charges via the micro USB and outputs 9 volts. But it also will accept an existing 9-volt connection and won't output power from the step-up power supply once the and so there, it's indicating that the battery's charged, right? What happens if I unplug that? Yeah. So we can see the charge there. Once the battery's charged, it flipped to what happens if we plug this in and unplug that? No charge, right? And only 2 volts that's probably residual in these capacitors. So that's interesting. So this means that it won't work the way I originally planned to use it. It does work as a boost converter from 3.7 volts to from 3.7 volts to 9 volts. So in that respect, it still works. But if you want to charge the batteries in the radio, you need to have a USB jack in. So that's something that I'll have to think about how to do. All right. Well, that's very interesting. I now know what my little board does. I know how it works more or less. And I can think about how I want to configure it in the radio if that's what I decide to do with it. One last experiment here. This is coming in from the USB power bank over here again. This time using a micro USB to go into the 5 volt power in. We've got 9 volts, 3.95 volts coming out. And I put it over here. So it's charged. We've got the green charged light on. We've got the red light, which seems to indicate that it's drawing through, that the power is being supplied by the board. What happens when we plug that in? Well, the red light seems to stay on. What happens if I unplug the battery? The red light stays on. What happens if we unplug this? So here it's working as a step up just from the 5 volts to the 9 volts. And we see 9.95. We put the battery in. No change, right? It showed the battery is charged. Well, presumably it's not charging it. And put the battery in. So, one thing you could do with this is just use it as a step up from USB to generate a 9 volt output, with the advantage that it's got battery backup. So just not use this UPS side thing at all. And if you were doing that in a radio, there's actually no reason why you couldn't just wire this in the battery compartment, assuming there's space for it. Thinking out loud here. And then you could charge it with USB. You could still use the power supply in, it just wouldn't charge the batteries. That was my power bank shutting off. This is one of those ones that shuts off if you don't have a load on it. But with it shutting off, we still have, you know, our 9 volts here. So you could not use the 9 volts here at all. Output through the switch on the power plug so that this is never connected to the 9 volts in, but we know it won't damage it because we've got this UPS circuit in it. I have to think about how to use this. It's interesting. It's an interesting little board. It's got a lot of possibilities, as does the 12 volt one. So I've changed my mind about which radio I want to put this in. This is the power supply, and I'm glued. Well, I guess it is gluing, sort of. I've put the battery holders onto this, and I've glued on, soldered on some little clip-on wires, because this battery pack fits perfectly in the back of this Panasonic right here. So what I've done is I've soldered a little wire onto the positive battery terminal, and I have these clips. So I'm going to clip this onto the negative battery terminal, this onto the positive. just for the moment. This is a quick way of figuring out what's going on. I'll just put that over here. Here are my 18650s. Make sure we get them in the right way around. And we have the power light on there. So let's turn this on. So this will power this, but the downside to it is that you'll run this this little power supply all the time. The light's going to be on. And so I don't know. I mean, the question is, how long will this last? It could be straightforward to remove that LED and then that wouldn't draw any extra current. But does this thing discharge the batteries any faster than, say, a power bank kind of circuit would? I don't know. But at the moment, this kind of amusingly, I'll show you, fits under there like that. Perfectly fine. I don't have the battery cover, which does lead to the idea of making a battery door cover and putting a breakout USB jack on it. So, I mean, this is an almost, this battery door cover, this battery door is almost a flat piece with two clips there. So you could almost put a piece of something like, this is a bad example, but this is, you see, it almost works. You could almost do that. Wouldn't come quite over to the bottom, but you could almost do that and then attach this to that and have it slide in. You could make it so that there'd be, there's where the clip was. And it's too bad I don't have the battery door for this. This would be just about perfect if I did. But, yeah. Anyway, proof of concept, right? Well, it's a fun little project, and I will continue to play with this little thing for a while, I think. Well, thanks. I hope you've enjoyed this little video. It's not really going to go anywhere beyond this right now, I don't think. But if it does, I will do a follow-up and show you what I decided to do with that little power supply. Have a good evening.